White officers said black soldiers couldn't fight. Then the 761st Tank Battalion proved them wrong. 1942 to 1945. Over 1 million African Americans served in World War II, fighting for freedom abroad while denied it at home. The military was segregated. Most black soldiers were assigned to labor units, banned from combat because white officers claimed they lacked courage. But when the 761st Tank Battalion, the Black Panthers, finally got their chance, they fought for 183 consecutive days, longer than any other armored unit. When the 92nd Infantry Division's men stormed German positions in Italy, they did it knowing half their officers didn't believe they could. And when the Tuskegee Airmen flew bomber escort over Germany, they protected the same nation that forced them to use separate bathrooms. This is the story of soldiers who fought 2 wars simultaneously and won both.
November 2nd, 1944, near Athenville, France. General George S. Patton stood before the assembled tankers of the 761st Tank Battalion, his ivory-handle revolvers gleaming in the autumn sun. Behind him, 36 M4 Sherman tanks stretched across the muddy field, their crews, every man black, standing at attention. "Men, you're the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army," Patton began. His voice carried across the formation. "I would never have asked for you if you weren't good. I have nothing but the best in my army." Then came the burden that every black soldier in World War II carried. "Everyone has their eyes on you. Your race is looking forward to your success. Don't let them down." Not "don't let America down" or "don't let the Army down." Your race. As if 13 million African Americans would be judged by how well 700 men drove tanks. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers from Oklahoma stood in the turret of his Sherman, absorbing Patton's words. Rivers had grown up in a town where he couldn't drink from the same water fountain as white people, had ridden segregated trains to get to his segregated training camp, had been denied entry to restaurants while wearing his country's uniform. And now he was being told that his performance in combat would determine whether his entire race was considered worthy. What Patton didn't say, what he couldn't say, was that the 761st Tank Battalion was an experiment forced upon an unwilling military, an experiment that most white officers expected, even hoped, would fail, because failure would prove what they'd always believed, that black soldiers couldn't fight. This is the story of men who had to be twice as good to be considered half as equal. Soldiers who fought against Nazi racism while serving in a segregated army. Warriors who proved their courage to a nation that wouldn't let them vote. The United States military in 1941 was strictly segregated by law and regulation. Black soldiers served in separate units, commanded by white officers, assigned primarily to labor battalions. They loaded ships, drove trucks, built roads, and dug latrines. The official justification was military necessity, but internal Army documents from 1940 to 1941, declassified decades later, reveal the ugly truth. One memo from the War Department stated, "Leadership is not embedded in the Negro race. Studies show the cranial capacity of the Negro is 10% smaller than the white race, limiting their ability to process complex tactical information." Pseudo-scientific racism dressed up as policy. Major General Ben Lear, commanding the Second Army, wrote in 1941, "Negro soldiers lack the intelligence and courage for combat duty. They are, however, well suited for manual labor under proper supervision." These weren't fringe opinions. This was official military doctrine. Black soldiers were considered inherently inferior, suitable only for menial work. Combat was for white men. But World War II created demands that prejudice couldn't ignore. By 1943, the Army needed men, lots of them. Casualties in North Africa and Italy were mounting, and over 1 million African Americans had volunteered or been drafted, representing 10% of the entire military.
You can only use 10% of your manpower as laborers for so long when you're fighting a global war. The 761st Tank Battalion was activated in April 1942 at Camp Clyburn, Louisiana. The men who joined faced obstacles white soldiers never imagined. They trained in the segregated South, where local police regularly arrested black soldiers for impudence, making eye contact with white women, not stepping off sidewalks fast enough, existing while black in uniform. Private First Class E.G. McConnell from New York described arriving at Camp Clyburn. "We're riding the train south in uniform, proud, ready to serve. At every stop, we have to move to the colored car. In Alexandria, Louisiana, we get off to stretch our legs. A white MP threatens to arrest us for being in the white waiting room. We're soldiers, wearing the uniform, and we can't use the same bathroom as German POWs. The irony was inescapable. German prisoners of war, captured Nazis, could eat in restaurants and use facilities that were forbidden to black American soldiers. But the 761st trained anyway. They mastered the M4 Sherman tank, a 30-ton weapon that required coordination, technical skill, and tactical sophistication. They practiced gunnery until they could hit targets at 1,000 yards. They rehearsed maneuvers until they could execute them in darkness. Their motto became, "Come out fighting." Not because they were eager for combat, but because they knew they'd have to fight for the right to fight. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, the 761st's white commanding officer, was an unusual man for his time. He believed his black tankers were as capable as any white soldiers. He fought Army bureaucracy to get them proper equipment and training, and he protected them from the racist harassment that was standard in 1940s Louisiana. Bates later recalled, "I had the best tankers in the Army, bar none. They had to be better. They knew they'd face more scrutiny, more criticism, more pressure than any white unit. So they worked twice as hard, and they became twice as good." For 2.5 years, the 761st trained and waited and watched white tank battalions ship out to combat while they remained stateside. The pattern was obvious. The Army didn't trust black soldiers with combat roles. Then came the summer of 1944. The breakout from Normandy had succeeded, but at terrible cost. Patton's Third Army was racing across France, but his tank battalions were being ground down by constant combat. He needed replacements, and he didn't care what color they were. The 761st Tank Battalion shipped to France in October 1944. They landed at Omaha Beach, where 4 months earlier, white soldiers had stormed Hitler's Atlantic Wall. Now it was their turn. Patton's speech on November 2nd wasn't entirely encouraging. Yes, he was using them in combat, but his words carried an implicit threat. Fail, and you prove the racists right. Succeed, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be considered almost equal. The 761st entered combat on November 7, 1944, near Athenville. Their mission, support the 26th Infantry Division's attack on German positions. What happened over the next 183 days would destroy every racist assumption about black soldiers' combat capability. In their first engagement, the 761st destroyed 3 German tanks, numerous fortified positions, and enabled the 26th Infantry Division to capture their objectives. The white infantry commanders, many of whom had privately expected the black tankers to fold under fire, watched in surprise as the 761st executed their mission flawlessly. Captain David Williams, commanding Able Company, reported, "Engaged enemy armor at 0730, destroyed 1 Panzer IV at 800 yards, suppressed enemy infantry positions with machine gun fire. No casualties, objective secured by 0900. Professional, competent, deadly." But it was Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers who would prove just how wrong the racists had been. On November 16, 1944, Rivers' tank struck a German mine near Goubling, France. The explosion tore through the Sherman's track, immobilizing it. Shrapnel peppered Rivers' leg, causing severe wounds. The battalion medic wanted to evacuate him. Rivers refused. "We need every tank we can get," he told his company commander. "Patch me up. I'm staying with my crew." For 3 more days, Rivers fought from his damaged tank. He couldn't move the tank, the track was gone, but he could still fire the gun. From his stationary position, Rivers directed fire, destroyed enemy positions, and provided covering fire for advancing infantry. On November 19th, German forces counterattacked in strength. Rivers' immobilized Sherman became a priority target. German anti-tank guns focused their fire on his position. His crew begged him to abandon the tank. Again, Rivers refused. "They need us here. We hold." At 14:45 hours, a German 88mm shell penetrated Rivers' Sherman. The tank exploded. Rivers and 2 crewmen were killed instantly. Rivers was recommended for the Medal of Honor immediately. His actions had saved countless lives and held a critical position. But the recommendation was denied. The official reason? Insufficient documentation. The real reason? The Army had never awarded the Medal of Honor to a black soldier in World War II, and they weren't about to start. It would take 53 years for the injustice to be corrected. In 1997, President Bill Clinton finally awarded Reuben Rivers the Medal of Honor posthumously. His family received the medal he'd earned in 1944, but been denied because of the color of his skin. The 761st Tank Battalion fought for 183 consecutive days, longer than any other armored unit in the war. They participated in the Battle of the Bulge, where they helped stop Hitler's last great offensive. They drove into Germany itself, liberating towns and destroying enemy positions.
Their combat record was extraordinary. 183 consecutive days in combat, 131 officers and enlisted men killed, 22 Silver Stars awarded, 69 Bronze Stars awarded, 296 Purple Hearts awarded, over 300 towns and cities liberated. But perhaps the most telling statistic was this. After the 761st entered combat, white infantry divisions specifically requested them for support missions. The same divisions whose commanders had doubted black soldiers' ability now considered the 761st among the best tank units in the European theater. Lieutenant Colonel Hollis Hunt, a white infantry commander, wrote in his after-action report, "The 761st Tank Battalion performed with distinction throughout our offensive operations. Their crews demonstrated exceptional skill, courage, and tactical proficiency. I would be proud to serve with them again." From "they can't fight" to "I'd be proud to serve with them" in 6 months. While the 761st was proving itself in France, the 92nd Infantry Division, the Buffalo Soldiers, was fighting in the Italian mountains. They faced not just German defenders, but also their own chain of command. The 92nd was one of only 2 black infantry divisions to see combat in World War II. Many of their officers were white Southerners who didn't believe in their soldiers' abilities. Some actively undermined their own units. One battalion commander from Mississippi was overheard telling his officers, "Don't expect much from these boys. They'll fold when the shooting starts. It's not their fault. They just don't have it in them." His battalion proceeded to capture their objectives in a night attack against fortified German positions, taking 60 prisoners and suffering minimal casualties. Private First Class Vernon Baker from Iowa served with the 92nd Division's 370th Infantry Regiment. On April 5th and 6th, 1945, Baker led his platoon in an assault on German positions near Villaggio. Baker's combat report filed the next day was clinical. Destroyed 3 machine gun nests, killed 9 enemy soldiers in close combat, directed mortar fire on enemy observation post, led withdrawal of wounded under fire after company commander killed. What the report didn't capture was Baker crawling 250 yards under machine gun fire to destroy the first German position with grenades. Or Baker personally killing 5 German soldiers in a fortified house. Or Baker staying behind to cover his platoon's withdrawal alone against a German company. Baker was recommended for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation was denied. Insufficient witnesses, they said. The fact that most potential witnesses were black soldiers whose testimony was considered less reliable went unmentioned. Vernon Baker finally received his Medal of Honor in 1997, one of 7 black World War II veterans belatedly recognized. He was the only one still alive to receive it in person. At the ceremony, the 77-year-old Baker was asked why he'd risked his life for a country that treated him as a second-class citizen. His answer was simple. I wasn't fighting for America's past. I was fighting for America's future.
Perhaps the most famous black combat unit was the 332nd Fighter Group, the Tuskegee Airmen. These pilots faced an additional layer of discrimination, the widespread belief that black men lacked the intelligence and reflexes to fly fighters. The Tuskegee program began in 1941 as a compromise. Civil rights leaders and Eleanor Roosevelt pressured the War Department to train black pilots. The military, convinced black men couldn't fly, agreed, expecting them to fail and thus prove their inferiority. The washout rate at Tuskegee was deliberately set higher than white pilot training programs. The standards were more rigorous, the scrutiny more intense, because every failure would be used as evidence of racial inferiority. And yet, 992 pilots graduated from Tuskegee between 1941 and 1946. Second Lieutenant Lee Archer from New York was one of them. He later recalled the pressure. We knew we weren't just training to be pilots. We were representing every black person in America. If we failed, they'd say, "See, we told you they couldn't do it." So we couldn't fail. We wouldn't fail. The Tuskegee Airmen deployed to North Africa and Italy in 1943, flying P-40 Warhawks and later P-51 Mustangs. Their primary mission: escort American bombers deep into Europe, protecting them from German fighters. The results were remarkable. The 332nd Fighter Group flew over 1,500 combat missions. They destroyed 112 enemy aircraft in the air and another 150 on the ground. They shot down 3 German Me-262 jets, the world's first operational jet fighters. But their most impressive statistic? The 332nd never lost a bomber they were escorting to enemy fighters. This claim is slightly exaggerated. They did lose a few bombers, but their loss rate was dramatically lower than other fighter groups. White bomber crews, initially skeptical of being protected by black pilots, began specifically requesting the Red Tails, the Tuskegee Airmen's distinctive red-painted fighter tails, as escorts. Captain Harold Brown, a white B-17 pilot, wrote in his diary, "I don't care if they're purple with pink polka dots. Those red-tail boys keep us alive. They stick with us, they fight like demons, and they get us home. I'd rather have 4 red tails than 8 of anyone else." From "they can't fly" to "we want them protecting us" in 18 months. But the discrimination didn't stop because of combat success. Black soldiers in Europe were still subject to segregation, still treated as inferior by many white troops and officers. Technical Sergeant William Dabney, serving in a quartermaster battalion in France, described the surreal reality. French civilians treated us like heroes, invited us to their homes, thanked us for liberating their country. But white American soldiers expected us to step aside on the sidewalk. French women could talk to us, but the Army issued orders against fraternization between black soldiers and white women, even French women.
We were liberating Europe from racism, while our own army practiced it. The Germans we fought at least were honest about their beliefs. Our own people claimed to believe in freedom while denying it to us. The contradiction became impossible to ignore during the Battle of the Bulge. In December 1944, German forces broke through American lines in the Ardennes. Casualties were catastrophic. The Army desperately needed infantry replacements. General Eisenhower made an unprecedented decision: allow black soldiers from service units to volunteer for infantry duty, temporarily integrated into white units. Over 4,500 black soldiers volunteered. Most took demotions in rank to do it. Sergeants became privates to get the chance to fight. They gave up promotions and higher pay for the opportunity to prove themselves in combat. They were quickly trained and sent to the front, and they fought superbly. A post-battle survey of white officers who'd commanded these integrated units found that 84% rated black soldiers as excellent or very good in combat. White soldiers who fought alongside black troops reported dramatically more positive racial attitudes than soldiers who hadn't. But the experiment ended with the battle. Black soldiers were returned to segregated service units. The Army wasn't ready to integrate, even after black soldiers had proven their worth under the worst possible conditions. The injustice of the Medal of Honor denials became increasingly obvious as the war ended. During World War II, 464 Medals of Honor were awarded. Not one went to a black soldier, despite numerous recommendations and obvious acts of extraordinary heroism. The reason was simple: racism. A 1993 study, commissioned by the Army, examined Medal of Honor recommendations from black soldiers. The researchers found that black soldiers were held to a higher standard than white soldiers. Actions that would have earned white soldiers the Medal of Honor resulted in lesser awards for black soldiers. In 1997, Congress finally acted. 7 black World War II veterans were awarded Medals of Honor 52 years late. Only Vernon Baker lived to receive his. The others received theirs posthumously, their families finally getting recognition that should have come in 1945. At the ceremony, President Clinton said, "Today we fill the gaps in that picture and give a group of heroes who also loved their country the tribute that is very long overdue." History has been made whole today. But history can never be truly whole. 7 medals couldn't represent all the black soldiers whose heroism was ignored, couldn't compensate for the discrimination they faced, couldn't erase the insult of fighting for freedom abroad while being denied it at home. The service of black soldiers in World War II had profound impacts beyond the battlefield. When these men returned home, many became leaders in the civil rights movement. They'd fought for democracy in Europe. They were damned if they'd accept less than democracy at home.
Medgar Evers, who served in the European theater, returned to Mississippi and became a civil rights leader. He was assassinated in 1963 for fighting the same racism he'd encountered in the Army. Charles Rangel, who later became a congressman, served in Korea and fought in the Battle of Kunuri, earning the Bronze Star. He later said, "How do you tell a man who risked his life for his country that he can't vote, that he has to sit in the back of the bus? You can't, and we didn't accept it." The military itself began to change. In 1948, President Truman signed Executive Order 9981, mandating the integration of the armed forces. The order cited the service of black soldiers in World War II as justification. The integration was gradual and faced resistance, but by the Korean War, most units were integrated. And by Vietnam, the military was one of the most integrated institutions in American society. The irony is inescapable. The military that had declared black soldiers inferior became one of the first major American institutions to integrate. The Army that had segregated soldiers by race in 1941 was promoting black officers to command integrated units by 1953. Change came because black soldiers had proven every racist assumption wrong. They could fight. They could lead. They could perform under pressure. They could be trusted with America's security. All the things white officers had said they couldn't do. In 2007, the 761st Tank Battalion received the Presidential Unit Citation, the highest unit award the Army can bestow. The citation read, "The 761st Tank Battalion distinguished itself by extraordinary heroism in action. Despite facing discrimination and prejudice, the battalion fought with distinction." 53 years late, but at least it came. Today, black soldiers serve at every level of the U.S. military, as generals and admirals, as fighter pilots and tank commanders, as special operations soldiers and military scientists, Colin Powell became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Lloyd Austin became Secretary of Defense. This integration didn't happen by accident. It was built on a foundation laid by the men of the 761st Tank Battalion, the 92nd Infantry Division, the Tuskegee Airmen, and hundreds of thousands of other black soldiers who served in World War II. Men who were told they couldn't fight, then fought for 183 consecutive days. Men who were denied the Medal of Honor, then finally received it 53 years late. Men who were forced to use segregated bathrooms, then returned home to lead the civil rights movement. Men who faced discrimination from their own army, yet served with honor and distinction. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers died fighting for a country that wouldn't let him vote. Vernon Baker earned the Medal of Honor in a military that considered him inferior. The Tuskegee Airmen protected bombers while flying for a nation that forced them to sit in the back of buses. They fought two wars simultaneously: the war against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, and the war against racism at home.
They won both. Not immediately, not easily, but they won. Because their courage and sacrifice made it impossible to maintain the lie of racial inferiority. They proved, with their blood and their service, that character and courage have no color. In 1997, at the Medal of Honor ceremony, Vernon Baker, the only recipient still alive, was asked if he was bitter about waiting 52 years for recognition. His answer captures everything about black soldiers' service in World War II. "I'm not bitter. I'm proud. Proud that I served. Proud that my fellow soldiers proved every racist assumption wrong. Proud that our service helped change America for the better. The medal is nice, but the real victory was proving that we belonged, that we could fight, that we were worthy. We didn't fight for the America that was. We fought for the America that could be, and we helped create that America, one battle at a time." White officers said black soldiers couldn't fight. The 761st Tank Battalion proved them wrong. The 92nd Infantry Division proved them wrong. The Tuskegee Airmen proved them wrong. And in proving them wrong, they changed America forever. Come out fighting. That was their motto, and that's exactly what they did.